I'd like to call the meeting to order again and reconvene. We have determined from the checklist attendance that we do in fact have a quorum. They're being signed in, 95 members at this point. So we will resume at this point with consideration of Article 15 to see if the town will vote to exempt Camp Wampanoag from its municipal portion of taxes on its lands and buildings at 83 Wampanoag Road, Brattleboro, Vermont, for a period of 4 years from April 1, 2012. The April 1, 2011 assessed value being $351,890, the municipal portion of taxes being $3,931, and the education portion of taxes being $4,953. The chair would recognize Ms. Baboulis.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I move that the town exempt Camp Wampanoag Incorporated from its municipal portion of taxes on its lands and buildings at 83 Wampanoag Road, Brattleboro, Vermont, for a period of 4 years from April 1st, 2012. And I believe Eric Annis would like to speak to this.
There has been a motion. Is there a second? Mr. Annis.
Yes, I'm Eric Annis, District 2. Our camp director was here this morning, but we thought it would come up this morning, but it obviously went a little longer than we thought, so I got the rein to give our spiel. The camp's been in operation in various places since the 20s. In 1965 or so, it moved up to West Brattleboro, and it's up on a hill, and we've been exempt all along, and just like Tom Costello said, with the Little League field, it came up last year, the state questioning the camp's tax exemption. Before that, the state said we met the criteria. So we're now to be taxed, we're now taxable. So let's see. The camp's been financially, it's been tough the last couple of years. Last year, we did not operate. We decided to regroup and diversify the programs we'd have at the camp. And we were getting it all together. Things were coming back together. And then Hurricane Irene took out our road to the tune of about $12,000. We got the road partially back, and we're hoping to finish it this spring. But if the camp becomes taxable, our finances are very, very tight, and it really puts the camp, whether we'll make it or not, in the long haul. So what we're asking for is tax exemption on the municipal side. I don't even know if I dare ask for the educational side, so I won't. Well, Frick is saying we are educational. We have an emphasis on wilderness education, but we'll see. So we're asking for the exemption on the municipal side. Right now, the camp, we believe, is overassessed, overvalued in the lister's office, and that's a different thing, but let's see. The camp's open to the public. The camp programs, there's, let's see, the programs, we have scholarships. If anyone can apply, the land's open. It's not posted all season, and I'm open to further questions.
Is there further questions? Is there further discussion? Ms. Davison.
Hi, Judy Davidson, District 3. I certainly support Camp Wampanoag. This was a question, more of a point of information, a comment that I didn't want to do last time because there was too much conversation. I just would like to support John Wilmerding's comment that maybe the Finance Committee would take a look at some criteria, some uniform criteria for the nonprofits, because I'm relatively new to town, but when I come every year, I'm not quite sure how to vote on some of these issues. I don't know enough information. So I just would support that comment that the Finance Committee might come up with some uniform criteria for the nonprofits in the future. But I certainly support this camp.
Other discussion? Yes.
Hi, Sherry Manning, District 1. Is it possible to query the lister, Al Gerard, who's in the audience?
It certainly would be, Ms. Manning.
Thank you. Al?
Is Mr. Gerard?
Thank you, Al. I was hoping you might be able, I don't know if everybody was here at the town informational meeting a week ago Wednesday night, but would you mind just clarifying for us why the state pulled these out this time and said not exempt? And I understand that normally these would be in the whole list rather than pulled out for the town meeting as well. Would you mind just speaking to that?
I'll try.
Thank you.
It's kind of a murky area. As was mentioned, Camp Wabanong, as well as the Little League Field, did have voted exemptions for a number of years. And then in 2006, the district advisor from the state tax department and our listers department at that point agreed that those two entities should be tax exempt, should not require a vote from the town, because under the statutes of public, pious, and charitable entities, nonprofits, as interpreted by a famous court case called the American Fly Fishing Museum court case, which I will not review at this time. It gives a pretty broad latitude for exemptions. This was in effect for the last several years until we got a letter from the tax department last fall saying that they were reviewing all of our exemptions as they are throughout the state. They are looking at them much harder than they really ever have before. And they sent us a letter saying we consider Little League Field and Camp Wabanong to be recreational facilities and not under the statute or the interpretation of the court case, which is why it's been thrown back to this body. After we got that letter, we notified the entities of the state's position, and they went to the select board to see that this article was included. Does that? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gerard. Other discussion? The question is, shall the town exempt Camp Wampanoag, Inc. from its municipal portion of taxes on the lands and buildings at 83 Wampanoag Road, Brattleboro, Vermont, for a period of 4 years from April 1, 2012? Are you ready for that question? If so, all those in favor, please rise. You may be seated. All opposed, please rise. You may be seated. The ayes have it, and you have approved Article number 15. Article 16, to see if the town will vote to exempt Family Garden, Inc. from its municipal portion of taxes on its lands and buildings at 861 Western Avenue, Brattleboro, Vermont, for a period of 4 years from April 1, 2012, April 1st, 2011, assessed value of $261,900. Municipal portion of the taxes are $2,933, and the educational portion of the taxes are $3,687. Mr. Chapman.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I move that the town exempt Family Garden, Inc. from its municipal portion of taxes on its lands and buildings at 861 Western Avenue in Brattleboro, Vermont, for a period of 4 years from April 1st, 2012.
Is there a second? There's been a motion and a second made. Is there discussion? Mr. Phillips.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Steve Phillips, District 3. I'd like to support this amendment, but I am going to offer this motion, but I am going to offer an amendment to it. The request that Family Garden made to the town was for the full exemption. It's in a little different situation than the other tax exempts. And the town's response was that they should ask this body directly for the education portion exemption. So I'd like to move to amend the motion, and I'm informed by the town attorney that this would be in order. In fact, I looked at the minutes of last year's meeting, and we did it last year as well. So there is some precedent for this. So I'd like to amend the motion to include not only the municipal portion of the taxes as exempt, but the education portion of the taxes. And I'd invite the body and the moderator to allow Thayer Tomlinson, who is the volunteer head of the board of the school, a volunteer, to answer any questions people may have. I know she's been waiting all day patiently with still one of her patient staff members. So Thayer may be able to answer questions.
Thank you, Mr. Phillips. Before we do that, however, is there a second to Mr. Phillips' motion to amend? Thank you. Ms. Tomlinson.
Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Thayer Tomlinson. I am a volunteer chair of the board. I'm here with Maggie Foley, who is also a board member. We are both parents of students at the Family Garden. And I wanted to just take a little time to talk about our program and our situation. The Family Garden is a not-for-profit child care center. We do own our own building. That building specifically has been a nonprofit child care center in Brattleboro for the last 30 years. Of the 18 nonprofit child care centers in Brattleboro, we do feel that we are in a somewhat unique situation as we're the only one that owns our own property and is not connected to a church or a school or another entity that can help offset the property taxes. Additionally, we also don't get any state funds to help with other programs. So our center is solely for child care. We do have a year-long program. It's a multi-age program, and so we accept anywhere from infants up to 5-year-olds. The infant demand for child care services in Brattleboro is quite high. There are not a lot of other child care centers that do accept infants, and so we find that as a real benefit to our center. Over 50% of the families that have children in our center are on some type of state support or other support. And that's the reason why in the letter we sent out and in the handout we had shown that in 2011 we show an operating loss of $8,200. And just to give more clarity on that, that $8,200 includes the 2011 tax bill from Brattleboro. And the other loss is just the fact that because we have parents on subsidies, if things go poorly or if they hit a snag, often they will pull their children out of the program and not pay that remaining balance. So part of it is a cash flow issue on our side. On the whole, we have a balanced budget operating until now, but that has been because of a tax exemption.
Is there further discussion? Yes, Mr. Wilmending.
I'd like to ask Thayer Tomlinson 2 questions. One is your child care organization tax exempt under federal code and state code?
I know we are tax exempt as a 501c3 status, and I think we have a state tax exemption number as well, but I would need to confirm that.
All right. Can you please tell us in rough numbers the approximate amounts of the salaries of people now working for the Child Care Center?
Sure. We have 4 staff employees that are the teachers. I don't know the annual salaries, but the assistant teachers make between $9.25 to $9.50 an hour. Our lead teachers make between $11 and $12 an hour as teachers. Our director makes approximately $25,000 a year as an annual salary. She's also a teacher in the center as well.
All right. What I want to do is speak in favor of the motion and urge my fellow town representatives to continue to support, as is the long tradition in our country, genuine charitable endeavors as exempt from taxation.
The debate at this point is on the Phillips motion to amend by adding the educational portion to the requested exemption in addition to the municipal portion. Yes.
Mary Kane, District 2. I am in support of this particular measure because of the extent to which it serves the lowest income factor in our community. And in addition, I would like to call Al, the lister, to come and explain just briefly about the process of why this is coming to us today, if it hasn't already been discussed.
Does Mr. Girard is still here?
I'm not sure if why this is coming to. Yes, let me just briefly review the history. For a long time, this organization was known as the Brattleboro Child Development Company. And it was, just to give you some of the history with this body, a 5-year exemption for municipal and education taxes was voted in 2001. And in 2006, also a 5-year tax exemption was voted of both municipal and education. That voted exemption ran out, expired last year, and at that time they did not come forward for a renewal, and they are now coming forward. So it does have a long history of this body voting for full exemption of their activities. And as I think she noted, it's unique among the child care centers that are nonprofits in that it owns its own entity.
Ms. Barboulas.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. A couple of things. One is, I think Mr. Wilmerding illustrated very much the issues associated with this and the low pay already for a nonprofit such as this. Infant care is extremely expensive, and generally what happens is they hope to subsidize it with the other programs that they have because they can't possibly charge what it costs to do infant care for families. So you know, it's sort of the general rule that they try to hope to make enough money off of the programs, the preschool programs that are less staff intensive. They have actually a unique situation because they do a family style, which means that they, you know, have a very high teacher-child ratio, which, you know, sort of models the family. One thing I wanted to point out was that this kind of makes sense because if they're getting children that are subsidized and they also get students from EES, which is, you know, an education-funded program, it kind of makes sense to do this, because it just ends up being a revolving door in which the money that they're paying is actually, they're putting it back into the coffers. So I just wanted to.
Further discussion with regard to the Phillips Amendment to include the educational portion of the tax in the requested exemption, all the way back in the back, please.
I'm just curious about this
Would you
law.
state your name, please?
Juanita Lane, District 2.
Thank you.
I'm curious about the loss of the $8,200 from the 50% of the families, because I understand that what the state doesn't pay, the family has to make up. And if that's so, where did this big loss come from?
Is there anyone who can respond to the question? Yes.
Hi, I'm Maggie Foley. The $8,200 includes the tax bill from the town of Brattleboro. The state financial assistance for families often gives the family a copay if they do not qualify at the highest level. Also, there are families that are right over the brink that don't qualify for state assistance, but are your middle-income families for which child care is an enormous expense and a big stretch. When those families get behind, we have had situations where they have left our program owing money. And that is part of our loss that we took last year. It's not a budgeted loss. We try to work with families as much as we can to get back on track, but in rare instances, families do leave us owing on their tuition bill. I hope that answers your question. Yeah?
I'm not sure.
You're not sure?
The parents don't have to make up the money? Is that what you said?
Yes, parents have to make up the difference between what the state reimburses the program and what the program charges for tuition. So if the state pays $190 a week for a child to attend the program, and we charge $210 a week, that family is responsible for the $20 copay.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Is there further discussion on the Phillips Amendment? Hearing none, the amendment before the body is, shall the educational portion of the tax be included in the exemption? All those in favor, please indicate by standing. All right, you may be seated. All those opposed, please stand. You may be seated. The ayes appear to have it, the ayes do have it, and you have approved the Phillips amendment. We return then to the article as amended, which is, shall the town exempt Family Garden, Inc. from its municipal and educational portion of taxes on its lands and buildings at 861 Western Avenue, Brattleboro, Vermont, for a period of 4 years from April 1, 2012. Are you ready for that question? If so, all those in favor, please rise. You may be seated. All those opposed, please rise. You may be seated. The article has been approved as amended. We now move to Article 17. And because this has a very lengthy list, I'm going to refer us to the actual warning and simply read the lead. To see if the town will raise and appropriate the sum of $131,860 to support human service programs and facilities for the residents of Brattleboro to be allocated amongst service providers as printed in your bulletin. The chair would recognize Dr. Schneck.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. That makes me feel worse that I'm actually going to read the list for you all so that it is in the record. I move that the town raise and appropriate the sum of $131,860 to support human services programs and facilities for the residents of Brattleboro to be allocated among service providers in the following manner. $1,800 to the AIDS Project of Southern Vermont, $3,000 to the American Red Cross Green Mountain Chapter, $8,000 to the Boys and Girls Club of Brattleboro, $8,750 to the Brattleboro Area Drop-In Center, $1,700 to the Brattleboro Area Hospice, $4,500 to the Brattleboro Housing Authority Summer Food Program, $6,500 to Brattleboro Senior Meals, $4,550 to the Clark Canal Street Community Association, $3,000 to the Connecticut River Transit, $1,200 to the Council on Aging for Southeastern Vermont Senior Solutions, $1,000 to the Family Garden, $2,700 to the Gathering Place, $4,500 to Health Care and Rehabilitation Services, $2,500 to Kids Place, $600 to the Maple Leaf Farm, $7,500 to the Morningside House Emergency Shelter, $3,000 to the Phoenix House of New England Rise, $1,000 to Prevent Child Abuse Vermont, $980 to RSVP Green Mountain, $7,500 to Southeastern Vermont Community Action, $3,500 to the Turning Point of Windham County, $1,500 to Vermont Adult Learning, $680 to the Vermont Association for the Blind and Visually Impaired, $2,000 to the Vermont Center for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing, $1,200 to the Vermont Center for Independent Living, $36,000 to the Visiting Nurse Association and Hospice of New York and New Hampshire, $4,200 to the Windham Child Care Association, and $8,500 to Youth Services Big Brothers Big Sisters. Oh, sorry, Hospice of Vermont and New Hampshire, Visiting Nurse Association. And I would like to speak on this motion.
Is there a second? Very well, go ahead.
I know. I just almost appropriated New York money. Okay. With all due respect to the Human Services Committee, I have never attended a Human Services Committee and hope to never attend one because they make some of the most difficult decisions of all of the committees out there. This is a group that gets together. I can say, even though I've never been to a Human Services Committee, it has never been said at a Human Services Committee to look at one of the organizations and say, yeah, that one has enough money. That has never been said ever at a Human Services Committee. So I would ask that we take a moment and recognize the members of the Human Services Committee who are charged with this unbelievable task.
Yes, go ahead.
Ann Darling, District 2, and I am a member of the Human Services Committee. Thank you. The only other of us who's here today is Doug France, here. And I'd like to thank all of us, actually, especially Vicki Dunn, who's served as our chair for several years. She and her family are in the process of moving to Pennsylvania. So I want to say a special thank you to her. And we also are a committee of the town meeting. So we thank you for... I'm sorry. We are a committee of the town meeting. We're also looking for someone to replace Vicki, and we're looking for another member as well. We are recommending the total amount of $131,860, which is level funding from last year, because we know that we are town residents and we know that taxes are very high. We want to keep things level. We also feel that this is very, very important money, very, very important way to spend the money of the town. I just want to let you know how we prioritized our recommendations. We prioritized those agencies whose primary function is to provide food, shelter, and other urgent needs. We considered their financial health, their fundraising capacity, and any alternate sources of funding. And we also this year considered those agencies who had been asked to step up and provide a lot of assistance for people who were affected by Tropical Storm Irene. So Doug and I are here to answer any questions if anyone has any.
Further discussion? All the way in the back, Mr. Rounds, I think it is.
Paul Rounds, District 3. I'm just looking at the sheet. We made the applications and the adjustments, and it says Family Garden, you want to give them, they asked for $2,500, you want to give them $1,000. Says they paid taxes last year, $2,934. We just added another $3,000 or $3,900 for their exemptions there. So, I'm just wondering, could we reconsider a little bit of this at some time? I don't want to make a motion to take $1,000 out, but I just wish we'd look at everything that we're doing, please.
Thank you, Mr. Rounds. Other questions, comments, or discussion? Ms. Davison.
Judy Davidson, District 3. I have a question for Ann. I truly appreciate the work of this committee. This is really one of those most difficult committees in town to work on, so I agree with Ken Schenk on this. But I was just noticing that the visiting nurses had such a large amount of money, more than the other organizations, $36,000 versus, some of the others. So I was just curious about the decisions, the criteria that led to your decision, your committee making that kind of a decision. Thank you for your work.
Ms. Darling is interrogated.
I don't discuss the merits of each individual application. I will say that historically, the Visiting Nurse Association was funded by the town for quite a few years, and then a few years ago, we were asked to take them on in our committee and to consider their application. They were funded at, I believe, $48,000. Does that sound about right? So knowing that our funding was very important to them, we wanted to maintain a high level of funding for them. As you may look back, and this chart only goes back a few years, but if we've gradually reduced the amount that we have given them. That's kind of all I can say.
Other questions?
Mr. Moderator?
Yes, Town Manager, Ms. Sontag.
Sorry, just to add to that, the town used to have a town nurse, and that's actually, it was positioned, that's actually how it was funded. Then that position was somehow eliminated or then taken over by the Visiting Nurses Association. So that's why it was higher, because it was actually a position. Then, when it was Visiting Nurses Association, it was with the Human Services funding. The Human Services funding had been, up until 5 years ago maybe, was determined at the select board level. It was then determined due to some review of statutes, I believe, that it became a separate committee of representative town meeting. So that explains why it is, kind of the oddball in that list. And I agree. I think the committee's been working to try to figure out how to get things more in line.
Is there further discussion? Yes, Mrs. Kane.
I want to thank the committee, especially since last year I also came up and said the same thing, but I'm going to say it again. My district houses numerous deaf people. We are not giving the deaf any more than we ever did. We still have a great many deaf people in our community, the Austin School, and I would encourage you to please consider their needs, as English is ASL is their second language here and our second language in this community. So as a town rep for the Austin School area, I would sincerely appreciate that we consider in the future keeping them in mind. Thank you.
Mr. Womadig.
I'd like to offer a friendly amendment that we restore the missing $500 because what we're proposing to allocate for the Vermont Center for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing is $500 less than what the previous year's allocation was. So I'd like to move that we restore that $500.
Is there a second to Mr. Wilmerding's motion to add $500 to the proposed appropriation? Anyone wishing to make a point of order, please step over to the mic.
Peter Fallion, District 3. I'm just questioning the propriety of this particular action. It's been my understanding that as a body, we cannot change the recommended levels. We can either accept them as up or down. If I need to be corrected, can someone here in the administration correct me on that? But I believe as a member of the body, when this was originally decided 5 or 6 years ago, that that's what we decided.
Thank you, Mr. Fallion. Mr. Fisher, can you provide us some guidance?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. With respect to this, I can't remember if it's 5, 6, 7 years ago. The idea here was instead of having separate articles for each agency, thank you, coming before town meeting, that we created this committee that would look at all of these agencies with social services, and there would be one set amount, and the committee was then charged by this body at determining which amounts go to which agency. So with respect to raising, one agency versus another, it would be my opinion that that is out of order, given this body's charge to that committee that we had set it up that way 5 or 6 years ago. The point was to avoid having 30 more independent articles for town meeting for these social service agencies.
Mr. Wilmerding.
I'll accept that advisement, and in return I'd like to interrogate the Human Services Committee, because in 2 instances they reduced funding, one for health care and rehabilitation services, reduction in the amount of $2,500, and in this other instance, the Vermont Center for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing being reduced from $2,500 to $2,000. I'd be pretty sure that the Vermont Center for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing did not ask for less money this year, so I'm wondering the rationale for the reduction.
Mr. Wilmerding, am I correct that you have no objection to withdrawing your request for an addition? Thank you. Is there someone who can respond to Mr. Wilmerding's inquiry? Ms. Darling.
Okay. Again, I can't discuss individual applications, the merits of individual applications, because they're made in confidence. I will tell you that our process is that we have priorities and we have a certain amount of money to work with that we try to stay within. So we look at, we prioritize food, shelter, and other urgent needs, and we consider the organization's ability to raise other funds to support their what they are trying to achieve. In the case of, you were asking about which, John, you were asking about Vermont Center, and what was the other one? I'm sorry. From last year, you say. Yeah. Yeah, again, you're talking about reduced from last year. Yeah. Again, these are, this was a request for a very specific program. This was not a request for the entire Vermont Center for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing. You can't tell that from reading this, but it was for a very specific component, as is, the same is true as HCRS for their walk-in clinic. And so then you have to take a look at those versus the priorities that we have and versus the amount of money that we have. And that's kind of the calculus that we make, that we have.
The motion before the meeting is, shall the town raise and appropriate the sum of $131,860 to support human service programs and facilities for the residents of Brattleboro, to be outlined as printed in your warning. Mr. Cummings.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Chuck Cummings, District 1. I would respectfully disagree with Town Council. I don't think at any time did this body enable a committee to tell us the exact amount we would give each charity. I think we took action with regard to this matter by asking them to combine them into one article so that we could consider it under one article. The total amount is what we're going to appropriate. And I would suggest, inasmuch as we have, under Article 16, made available to Family Garden, Inc., another $3,687, that we reduce the Family Garden allocation of $1,000 under Article 17 to $500, and that we add that $500 to the Vermont Center for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing, making the total amount still $131,860. And that's what we are voting on.
Point of order. Point of order, please stand and address.
Frick Sprite, District 3. Unfortunately, I tend to agree with Chuck Cummings in terms of the process. However, Mr. Fisher suggested that we couldn't amend this. My understanding of what we signed on for here was to have this committee deliberate and look at the totality of applications and get much more information than any of us here could who are not on the committee, and make a reasonable and balanced proposal that takes into consideration a wide variety of issues. As Ms. Darling described, and that though we can amend it, that it's strongly discouraged because we have given over the process of vetting each of these organizations, and with in consideration of all of their hard work, my understanding is we can amend it, but that I personally would be loath to second guess their work. Do I understand it correctly? All right.
Well, Mr. Sprite, I agree. First of all, you got up on a point of order, and you're raising a question as to whether or not Mr. Cummings' motion is appropriate given the opinion that we just heard from Town Council. I would like to, first of all, ask Town Council if he's got any further thoughts on how we should proceed. If that doesn't work, then we can huddle here for a minute. But do you have any other thoughts on this, Mr. Fisher, as to how we can proceed based upon the motion that has been made by Mr. Cummings?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. With regard, the whole idea here was to not have 20 to 30 different articles on each social service. So the question, and really to go back, I don't have the minutes from our prior representative town meeting as when we set up the committee and its exact charge. But with regard, the question then is whether you can amend either the total amount up or down, or whether you can amend specific awards of the committee to raise or lower those. If you can do that, that in essence obviously is the will of the representative town meeting, but then you run what we were trying to avoid by taking it out of the select board process of putting it in the budget and making a town meeting committee was to avoid the having a trial on each social service agency at town meeting, and that's why it went to the committee. So, well, without looking back further, I don't have any further suggestions.
Okay, so my understanding is that we could raise or lower the total amount, and my understanding of Chuck Cummings' proposal does not involve changing the total amount, and therefore it doesn't actually qualify as an amendment. It is, as stated, then the same bottom line amount, which is what the warning article presents. So it is then perhaps a suggestion to reprioritize those things, but that would be advisory at that point.
Mr. Sprite, I think you're right on. I think the effect of Mr. Cummings' proposed motion is to leave the appropriation exactly the same, and that the only thing he is requesting is a reallocation, and under those circumstances, I think that that would be only advisory. It is, I think, similar to when we're acting on the total budget of the town, and we consider the lump budget. We are not permitted by state law to move beans around from the police department to the fire department, and that is not something that we are permitted to do. So I'm going to rule that the same applies in this particular situation, unless I hear any objection, and that the effect of Mr. Cummings' motion is to leave the appropriation in exactly the same amount. Now, if you do want to increase or decrease the amount of the Human Services budget, I think you have the ability to do that. And if Mr. Cummings wants to come up and add money for the purpose of adding money to the deaf and hard of hearing, he could do that. Does anyone have any objection to let me hear from the chairman of the board, Mr. DeGray.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. You know, one of the things, I didn't hear a second on Mr. Cummings' motion, but Mr. Cummings' motion, Chuck Cummings' motion here is doing just what we didn't want to have happen. And that is, we're going to take money from another organization to give it to another organization. And I think that that is highly inappropriate. We have a committee that is the toughest committee to sit on in town, bar none. My job is easy compared to theirs, trust me. And they do an outstanding job, and we appreciate that. Now, there was some reason for us to go and ask questions, why did you only give X to Y, or why did you only give B to Z, I don't think is appropriate for us. Join the committee. They're looking for volunteers. I didn't see anybody jump up and go, Mr. Moderator, I want to go there. So at the end of the day, I hope that we vote down Chuck Cummings' motion to take money from an organization we heard that was strapped for cash and in a deficit, and now we're going to take $500 for them, which is critical to their operation. So what we tried to do here, in doing what we were doing, is to not pit one organization against another and let that committee decide. So if someone wants to make a motion to add money to this, I do believe it is germane to add money or subtract money.
So
I think it is actually not the appropriate thing to do to penalize one to the benefit of another.
I've already ruled the motion is out of order, be it right or wrong, Mr. Cummings. However, I would like to give you this opportunity if you would like to make another motion and add money to the Center for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing, if that is something that you want to do. Okay, thank you, Mr. Cummings. I have you have the chair, the floor.
That's Peter Yost, District 2. Unlike the budget, where we can ask questions about how funds were allocated, every time we ask a question of this committee, they say, you know, it's confidential information and we can't share it. That means that this town-appointed committee, we either trust the judgments they have made in allocating the resources or we don't. We have no way of asking for more information, so it's pretty clear that we either accept what they've made judgment upon or we don't, and we all agree it's a hard-working committee. So
we return, ladies and gentlemen, to the fundamental question of shall the town raise and appropriate the sum of $131,860 to support human service programs and facilities for the residents of Brattleboro to be allocated amongst service providers as published in your warning. Is there further discussion? Yes, sir.
I guess this would be a question. Oh, Caleb Clark, District 2. I'm nervous. I assume that the committee was looking at the articles, understanding that the daycare center Family Garden was maybe going to get the taxes forgiven for municipal. But we've increased about 14 grand in 4 years, increased that a lot. That's a surprise, which might have weighed on their decision-making. So I understand Mr. Cummings' suggestion that we have, in a sense, provided more resources in the area of the next article. I guess that's all I want to say, but maybe someone else could be more daring.
Mr. DeGray, do you want to respond?
Yeah, a point of information. If you turn to your booklet on page 71, and on 71 you will see the allocations on page 71, and actually that the current year that we're in, if you look in actuals for 2011 and 2012, if you look for the Vermont Center for the Deaf, they're only getting $2,000 this year. That was changed in 2011 that dropped. So they are actually being level funded at the rate that they were funded last year. A reduction came last year, and actually I think Ms. Kane did make a motion to try to raise that appropriation for them, although sometimes my memory is a little bit foggy. But they are being funded at the same rate that they were last year.
Further discussion? Mr. Anna, Mr. Chapman. Thank you, Mr. Chapman. Mr. Annis.
Eric Annis, District 2, move the question.
The Motion has been made to cease debate. Again, it requires a two-thirds vote. Cease debate does not require a second. All those in favor of ceasing debate, please stand. It does require two-thirds. You may be seated. All those opposed to ceasing debate, please stand. The ayes appear, you may be seated. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it, and debate is ceased. So we return to the underlying question, which is, shall the town raise and appropriate the sum of $131,860 to support human service programs and facilities for the residents of Brattleboro, to be allocated among service providers in the manner as expressed in the motion, which is set forth in your warning article. All those in favor of the motion, please signify by standing. You may be seated. All those opposed, please rise. And the motion, the article, Article 17, has been not unanimously, but overwhelmingly adopted. Now we move to Article 18.
Point of information or point of something?
Yes, Mr. Rounds.
Paul Rounds, District 2. I was just asked to inform everybody the BUHS Costa Rica group is very grateful to the representatives for their support, and they still have some fresh coffee out there, but they'll be leaving at 3:15, so if you want to get it now. Thank you.
I would take a break for that purpose, except that we've got a lot of business to do, so if anyone chooses to get up and get a last-minute cup of coffee, please do so. But in the meantime, let's move on to Article 18 to see if the town will raise and appropriate the sum not to exceed $10,000 to assist in funding Brattleboro climate protection for fiscal year 2012, July 1st, 2012 through June 30th, 2013. The chair would recognize Mr. Gartenstein.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I move that the town raise and appropriate $10,000 to assist in funding Brattleboro's Cities for Climate Protection campaign for fiscal year 2012, for July 1, 2012 to June 30, 2013.
Is there a second? Discussion. Does anyone? Ms. Baboulas.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I have an amendment to add to that, that out of the $10,000, it include membership in the International Council for Local Environmental Initiatives. And I'll speak to why I'm making this amendment. It's my understanding that for a number of years,
Ms. Baboulas, first of all, can you? I'm going to need a second, but before I do that, I want to be able to get this down correctly.
Sure.
Your amendment is that it include membership in the
International Council for Local Environmental Initiatives.
Second.
Point of order.
Mr. Frick.
I think we're back to we're not changing the amount, so.
Again,
No, we're not changing the amount.
It's not a question of changing the amount. I think this is a minor type of amendment, unless there's objection.
Okay.
I don't see any problem in going forward with this. There has been a second. Ms. Baboulas, I want to hear you out on this.
Well, it's my understanding that for several years, Brattleboro Climate Protection did have the membership in this and provided data to the town. And last year, the planning department paid for the membership. So I just want to make sure that if we're putting money into the Brattleboro Climate Protection for that purpose, that it include that membership.
Okay, there is a second. Is there any further discussion on the amendment? If not, all those in favor of Mrs. Baboulas' amendment to include a proviso that membership be included in the International Council for Local Initiatives, please signify by standing. You may be seated. All those opposed? And the ayes do appear to have it. And Mrs. Baboulas' amendment concerning membership as a part of this in the International Council of Local Initiatives will be included in the article if it is approved by this body. Is there further discussion on Article 18? Yes, Mr. Phillips.
Point of information. Oh, this is short. I'm tall. Okay. Steve Phillips, District 3. I think there was some confusion there because no one really understood how much Dora is talking about. The cost would just be helpful as information even if we include it.
It's my understanding that it's $500 a year, and that the town needs the data for town planning and things.
Great. Thank you.
Again, we return. Yes.
Point of
Sure.
information, Sherry
Yes.
Manning. I have a lot of questions today. Is it possible to have Paul Cameron speak to that, even though we already just voted it in?
No, we only voted on that one issue, and that issue has been determined. But I'd like since you've raised this, Mr.
But could we
Cameron.
also ask him to comment
Sure.
on that? I'm sorry. I
Sure.
know it's de facto, but I would
Mr. Cameron, if you could speak briefly to that issue, that would be appreciated.
Annual membership in ICLEI Local Governance for Sustainability is $600 for a town of this size. This past year, that amount was, I believe, came out of the Planning Department budget. I believe it's important for the town to be a member of ICLEI in order to have access to software that we use to measure emissions and energy use. So I would like to see that membership continued.
Yes, Ms. Burke.
Molly Burke, District 2. I support this, but I think it's not clear the way it was voted on that that would be part of the $10,000. Or would we have had to add $600 to make the article $10,600? I'm confused.
No, I think the way that it was voted was that the membership would be included in the appropriation of $10,000. Am I correct, Ms. Baboulas? Yes. Is there further questions on the motion? Yes, Mr. Stewart.
Valerie Stewart, District 1. I'd just like to ask Mr. Cameron, does that mean that you are in effect level funded in terms of last year? Were you funded at 10,000? And so therefore this year, does that 600 come out of that 10,000?
It sounds to me like the 600 would come out of the 10,000. So last year we received 10,000, so it would be minus 600 this year.
So does that mean that your organization would need to, in effect, raise $600 more?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Dr. Schnick.
Yeah, I think people know that I like plowing through these meetings as fast as possible, and I'm on the verge of making a motion to reconsider the vote that we just did based on the sizable number of us that didn't really understand what just happened. We actually just voted on a motion without even knowing the cost of it, and even if the motion goes the same way that it just did, I think it's incumbent upon us as responsible town meeting members to reconsider the motion and re-vote now with the actual information that we should have had before we voted on it.
That puts us in a real dilemma because, well, I'll hear Mr. Fisher out.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Another option would be a simple motion to amend to make it $10,600, which would have the same effect of what Dr. Schneck, I believe, is
So
trying
moved.
to
I was
get at.
going to amend by $600 to $10,600.
And I second it.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Manning, for bailing us out on that one. And we have a second, so the motion to amend is to increase the amount of the appropriation by $600. Mr. Phillips.
Steve Phillips again, District 3, point of order. The way the article is warned, it clearly says not to exceed $10,000.
It does say not to exceed, but Mr. Fisher, do you see, again, don't we have the right to amend the motion and increase the sum?
Absolutely. With regard to motions to amend, you can amend to say not to exceed whatever figure, so long as that motion to amend is passed. So just because the article says the article is not to exceed, that just sets the number that is to be considered by this body.
With respect, Mr. Moderator,
yes.
I'd just suggest that if it had said how much, I think you'd be right, but I don't agree. I'll accept the moderator's ruling.
Yes, just a minute. We will take this up, Mr. Phillips, but another point of information from Mr. Chapman. You have the floor, Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I'd just like some clarification on exactly what the motion was, because the article... This doesn't... Can you hear me now? Okay. My question is on exactly what the motion was, because the article says to see if the town will raise an amount not to exceed, but the language that I think I heard was to raise and appropriate $10,000, not to exceed. So I'm confused as to precisely what it is we've been asked to vote on.
May I just clarify, Sherry Manning, District 1? My amendment should read not to exceed $10,600.
Okay. I have your, Mrs. Manning, your motion to amend to $10,600. Is there a second to your motion? Okay. Mr. Phillips, I hear your objection, but I think based upon the way that the motion is read, that we could increase to not more than $10,600. And the issue before the body right now is Ms. Manning's motion as to whether to increase it by $600. Mrs. Barboulas.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. My whole reason for making this motion was because this is why we give $10,000 to Brattleboro Climate Protection, because they're supposed to be gathering this data. And as part of gathering the data, they should be paying for the membership to this organization. By increasing the budget to $600, you're basically saying that the town is once again going to pay for the membership, so it doesn't matter. You might as well just leave it at $10,000 and say that it's going to come out of the planning department budget.
Mr. Fisher, I'd like to ask you just for your advice. Do you see any problem under Article 18 from a legality standpoint to raising the appropriation by an additional $600?
Not with respect to the motion to amend to raise that. I don't see any problem with that. Okay. Perhaps given what Ms. Babula said, the effect of raising it would be that the tax rate would be increased to raise another $600, whereas I think the main point that Ms. Baboulas was making is that of the original 10,000, her original motion to amend was to condition it upon being a member of that council. That seemingly would come out of the Brattleboro Climate Protection's budget, and I think Mr. Cameron is correct that therefore the amount that we're actually funding, if it's just the 10,000, is we're really funding 9,400 for him to do his work, whereas before that was paid for out of the planning department. So if we're going along that route, then in my opinion, I don't see any problem with a motion to amend to increase the amount. The only other option would be a motion to reconsider Ms. Baboulas's prior motion that passed on the basis that there's certainly, now that we're 10 or 15 minutes into it, a lot of confusion on the matter. I leave that to your discretion, given we don't do motions to reconsider on articles that have
Right.
passed.
I think, in my opinion, more problematic to reconsider it. Mrs. Manning's motion to raise the sum by $600 is the current amendment for consideration, and I would ask if there is any further discussion on Mrs. Manning's motion to increase the sum by $600. Mr. Wheelock.
Marshall Wheelock, District 2. Earlier we had a motion that we passed stating how much we were going to raise to defray our expenses next year. We call it a budget. In that budget was a line item for $10,000. If we increase this to 10.6, will we not also need to add $600 onto the previously agreed upon budget total? Because we're not allowed to handle individual items within the, in other words, if we change this to 10.6, we are in effect directing the select board that they must move the funds find the funds somewhere else in the budget and move them to this article. That's my understanding.
Member of the administration is interrogated. Ms. Sontag?
No. Again, the amount that was approved in the article on the budget was the amount without all the other separate articles. So at the end of the day, we'll put all those articles together, and that will be the total amount of the budgets. Again, in the books, we do show the total amounts as though all the articles passed as presented. But obviously, you know, the select board got a big old raise, and so that'll sorry, so that'll go up, but it doesn't impact that budget article.
Mr. DeCray?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I'm going to ask you to defeat the motion. And the reason for that is why increase our taxes by $600 when we've already been paying it? So if you defeat the motion, we'll go back to the original question of $10,000 and the $600 that we have been paying for the membership out of the planning department's budget, who won't be happy about it, but we're still paying, we're already paying it, so why increase our budget by $600? So I encourage you to defeat this. Thank you.
We're going to let Mrs. Baboulas, since it's her motion, speak to it.
Just one, last year the planning department paid the $600. Prior to that it was paid by Brattleboro Climate Protection. I just want to make that clarification that the change happened over the last year, and once again, this is why we're giving money to Brattleboro Climate Protection so they can do this.
Is there further discussion? Ms. Edwards?
Sarah Edwards, District 3. It's a point of information. So the planning department paid for this last year. Do we know that they will pay for it again this year?
A member of the administration, Ms. Sontag, is
A
interrogated.
couple things just to clarify, the first time the town, and it was the town that joins ICLEI, it didn't come from the Planning Commission. I think it came from the town manager's department. Is that, I think, correct? Something like that. And then last year, or year before last, we didn't have, the membership dropped.
That's right.
And then last year, planning picked it up, and again, a lot of the data was used for information feeding into the town plan. It's a little bit, you get a little gray in this area because Paul works in the planning department because he works on a lot of the projects that we do. Sometimes it gets a little gray, and if we see a benefit in the town belonging to ICLEI and for the data that we have access to, and we can use the data, and Paul, climate protection can use the data, it makes sense that we have one membership. And so if you ask, would planning pay for it again, I'm not sure what their budget is, but I heard my board member say we'd be looking at that. So we'd be looking at that.
Mr. Webster.
Don Webster, 60, District 3. I don't always find myself in the position, but I agree thoroughly with Chairman DeGray on this motion. If this was an important membership to have, it should have been in the budget that came to us. If you want $10,600, bring it if you want to include that as part of that budget. But in effect, what we're doing here is what we said we're not going to do elsewhere, is micromanage. And if there ever was an organization that shouldn't micromanage, it's probably Brattleboro Town Representative Meeting. So I would urge my colleagues here to defeat the amendment and see if they can find the money elsewhere. If not, maybe climate change has to live with 9,400.
Is there further discussion? Mr. Sprite.
Rick Sprite, District 3. I have like 3 different things on my mind. First of all, I'd like to say that if there ever was a time that we should be doing more, not less, in this department, it is now, with $4 a gallon diesel fuel / heating oil. $600 represents a nickel per person in town. As broke as I may feel, I can handle that. I'll fork over a quarter. I'll cover several people's portion of that. With all due respect to Don Webster, I suggest we support this amendment. I'd also like to observe that it seems without Tim at the helm, we've sort of forgotten all the procedures that we have known all over these many years, and have gone over the same thing about a half a dozen times today. Amendments adding money are amendments adding money, and they're okay. We may not like increasing the budget, and that's a separate issue, but we can increase or decrease any of these individual articles. And so I'm hoping that we're done with that subject for today, so that we can get home before dark. Thanks.
Mr. Allen.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. John Allen, District 2. I call the question.
Okay, the question has been called, and once again, that is a 2/3 vote. All those in favor of ceasing debate, please rise. You may be seated. All those in favor of continuing debate, please rise. And debate ceases. So the recurring question is on the Manning Amendment to increase the funding and appropriation for Brattleboro climate protection by $600. All those in favor of the $600 increase, please rise. You may be seated. All those opposed to the $600 increase, please rise. You may be seated. The noes appear to have it. The noes do have it, and you have defeated the amendment. We now return to the principal question to see if the town will raise and appropriate the sum of $10,000 to assist in the funding of Brattleboro Cities for Climate Protection campaign for fiscal year 2012. Are you ready for that question? All those in favor, please indicate by rising. You may be seated. All opposed, please rise. And thank you. You may be seated. The article, specifically Article 18, has been approved as originally presented. We now move to the town school district portion of the meeting. Do we want to take a very brief recess, or is everybody okay to keep plowing? No. Keep going, all right. All right. So we move to this side of the room at last. Article 19, to see what salaries the town school district will pay its school board members. Mr. Yost.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I move that the legal voters of the town of Brattleboro School District authorize its Board of School Directors to pay the following amounts for the ensuing fiscal year. To its school directors, the sum of $2,000 each, except that the chairman shall be paid the sum of $3,000.
Is there a second? The motion has been made and seconded. Is there any discussion? Mr.
Moderator, I move to amend the motion to $3,000 per member and $5,000 for the chairman.
There is a second to amend the motion to increase the sum to $3,000 per school director and $5,000 for the chairperson. Is there any discussion?
Mr. Moderator?
Mr. DeGray.
Thank you. I would hope that we spend as much time on this question here as you did with us. And George, I hope you ask the same question you do to the board. Not that I don't think that they deserve a raise, but I think the time has come where we treat both bodies equally. And more often than not, the municipal budget and the municipal issues get treated much differently than the town school. Now, rightly or wrongly, I don't know. But I would hope that at least some of the same questions that were asked of us should be asked of them. And I'm going to support giving them a raise, but I at least hope that some of the questions that people asked me are asked of the town school board.
Well, I think it's only fair, Mr. DeGray, that we hear from Ms. Atkinson on that score.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. And thank you, Mr. Everett, for the compliment. And though I agree with you on the basic fairness issue in having both bodies be paid the same amount. And I also agree with what young Mr. Davis said earlier in the day, that a larger stipend for citizens who choose to serve on this board, it may make it easier for people to decide to serve. Many of the prospective candidates for service on the school board are parents of young children, and a meeting at 5 o'clock, dinner time, on a fairly regular basis, plus the other work we do every month, can have a financial impact. That being said, our board is a policy governance board. We function in a somewhat different manner, and we are supported in our work by an outstanding professional staff that makes our job of a different nature than that on this. Oh, sorry, Barbara. I'm so sorry. I don't mean it to be said that way. I am talking about Barbara, don't take it that way. I'm so sorry. My point is, our work is of a different nature. If we were to raise our budget by some thousands of dollars this year, I'd rather see it go to the library or something else, but I would support consideration of this motion at a future meeting. Thanks.
The issue for consideration is the amendment proposed by Mr. Everett to raise the sum to $3,000 for each member of the school board and $5,000 for the chairperson. Is there any further discussion? I think I want to take somebody different here. Mrs. Kane, go ahead.
Mary Kane, District 2. In all fairness, I just want to say thank you. And also, could you just briefly tell us approximately how many hours you devote to our loving, caring, wonderful, amazing children that you actually churn out every day and every year to go on to higher and better and more interesting jobs than we could ever possibly have ever thought of? Thank you.
Include our own kids, or?
Would that include town meeting in that total?
I just want to kind of add to what Margaret said, but also to respond to that question. We don't do the work that produces those children. It's the astonishing staff, the instructional staff, the support staff, the administration, and it's an amazing school district. And in fact, right now, today, we've got an elementary team, principal and 3 teachers presenting at the Association for Supervision and Curriculum Development, which is a nationally recognized organization, and they're being recognized and presenting based on the progress they made in closing the achievement gap between low-income students and other students. It's astonishing progress, and our work is joyous. It's almost like, how could they possibly pay us? My emotion most of the time is, what more can we do to help you?
Yes, Ms. Wilmot.
Not the point.
We didn't answer.
What was the question?
How many hours?
Oh, how many hours? Per week, well, I spend more than most because I read a lot about what's going on in the state level, and also in terms of the School Boards Association. So I spend probably a couple of hours in a meeting every other week, and probably a couple hours every other day reading and keeping up on educational issues. So maybe 8 or 10 hours a week.
Mark Truian. I would like to add to that. We are amply paid. We have a great mine doesn't work.
They just have to turn it on.
Do not pay attention to the people behind the curtain. I'd like to say that I believe also that the school board is amply compensated, but as with the select board, we are not in it for the money. So we get the money and all the library paste we can eat, all right? To that end, we have a support staff of dozens and dozens of highly skilled professional educators and teachers. And it is a joy to work with these little crumb grabbers. Thank you. Much like Dave, I try to stay abreast of all the information that comes down from the Vermont School Board Association, all the articles I see on education between pre-kindergarten and middle school. We do concern ourselves with what happens before they come into the elementary schools, what happens when they go on to BAMS. We try to have a complete insight as to what is coming at us and what we are passing on in the way of a finished product. Approximately 10, 15 hours a week.
Mr. Harvey.
George Harvey, District 3. I have no problem with the idea of giving a raise in the amount of money going to the school board. It's very modest. I would like to say, however, that as a matter of clarification, since Dick DeGray has chosen to bring it up, I'm going to double the amount and ask that each town meeting rep be given 2 slices of pizza.
Are you ready for the question on Mr. Everett's motion to amend to $3,000 for each board member and $5,000 for the chairperson?
Chris Lenoir, District 2, and I just want to make a comment, and similar to the question I asked when this came up with the Select Board, which is, as my first representative town meeting, this has been a real uncomfortable conversation. We're not being given any context as to, and I'm not saying, I mean, I think everybody deserves, you know, adequate compensation for the work they're doing, but we are voting on things that we aren't given any context on other than a snap judgment on how many hours you're putting in per week. There's got to be a better way to incrementally assess the kind of work that both the school board and the select board are doing and increase their compensation adequately at those times.
Further discussion on the amendment. Mr. Wolverding.
John Wilmerding, District 3. For me, the salient point is, as the chair had explained, their tasks are different, and they are a policy determinative body. Whereas the Select Board, many of us, probably most of us, regard the Select Board as the town's executive branch, and they seem to put in more time and more hours, and they have to be competent in more areas to effectively manage in the executive capacity the affairs of town government. So I would vote against the amendment.
Further discussion? Yes, ma'am.
I'm Mary Ellen Bixby, District 3. I would suggest that we vote this down and that we consider this next year at this time when we can look at both the BUHS school board and the town school board together and at their respective meetings try to keep the balance. And if we have a raise which we vote for now, I feel uncomfortable not giving the same raise to the BUHS board. So I would suggest voting this down and bringing it up again next year.
The issue for consideration is the Everett amendment to raise the sum to $3,000 per school director and $5,000 to the chairperson. Yes, Doctor.
At the risk of perpetuating this West Side Story thing we have going on, I agree with my colleague, Mr. Lenoir, that I find myself sitting here with no criteria by which to vote yes or no. I know what I do here. I don't have as much of a sense, and I would assume, you know, sometimes vice versa is true in terms of the number of meetings, whether they're televised or not, accountability, all those different items. And so I'm sitting here, I will be voting no on it just because I have no criteria sitting before me to make a rational decision that can be defended to the people outside this room.
Further discussion? Mr. Webster?
Don Webster, District 3. I'm sort of like Orion was this morning, thinking about budgets and these kinds of things. I don't think there's been a school issue that I haven't supported the school district and the high school over the years for many, many times. And I think I'm leaning towards saying no, although I'm open on it. The reason is I speak as a person who was chairman of the high school board for, I think it was 7 or 8 years in the 80s, and have been familiar with education for some time. And there's a distinct level of difference in the intensity and the amount of time that is spent as chairing a school board, as a selectman has been pointed out, policy making, even though the chairman of the school board, if he's doing or she's doing her job right, pays attention and oversight of the administrators. And that takes maybe a little extra time. But in this situation, I think I'd rather postpone this and bring it up some other time. I like the idea of equalness, but I'm not sure it's quite equal in this case. So I'm leaning against voting no, and with appreciation for the school board and all it's done over the years.
The issue for consideration by the meeting is the Everett amendment to increase the sum to $3,000 for each board member and $5,000 for the chairperson. Is there further discussion? Dr. Abel?
Peter Abel, District 1. Thank you for recognizing me. I also served as the chairman of the school board from '86 to '89. And I have to agree with Mrs. Bixby and Don Webster that there is a difference between the intensity level and so forth between the school board and the town government. I also agree with Mrs. Bixby about consideration of the high school board. Thank you.
Further discussion? Hearing none, the issue for your consideration is whether to adopt the Everett Amendment by increasing the compensation to the school directors to $3,000 and to the chairperson to $5,000. All those in favor, please, of that amendment, please rise. You may be seated. All those opposed, please rise. You may be seated. The noes clearly have it, and the Everett Amendment has been defeated, and we return to the original motion, which is, shall the legal voters of the town of Brattleboro School District authorize its Board of Directors to pay the following amount for the ensuing fiscal year. To its school directors, the sum of $2,000 each, except that the chairman shall be paid the sum of $3,000. Are you ready for that vote? If so, all those in favor, please rise. You may be seated. All those opposed, please rise. There's nobody to be seated. So you have unanimously adopted Article 19, and we continue to Article 20. To see if the town school district will authorize its town school directors to borrow money in anticipation of taxes. Mr. Scholes.
David Scholes, Town School Board. I move that the legal voters of the town of Brattleboro School District authorize its Board of Directors to borrow money pending the receipt of taxes and not in excess of anticipated revenue for the school year by the issuance of its notes or orders payable not later than 1 year from the date thereof.
Is there a second? Discussion. If not, all those in favor of the motion as presented by Mr. Scholes, please rise. You may be seated. All those opposed, please rise. And you have adopted Article 20. Article 21, to see if the town school district will authorize the district to accept and expend categorical grants and aid received from the state of Vermont and the United States government. Mr. Scholes.
I move that the legal voters of the town of Brattleboro School District authorize its Board of School Directors to accept and expend categorical grants and aid received from the state of Vermont and the United States government.
Is there a second? Is there discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please rise. You may be seated. All those opposed, please rise. And you have adopted Article 21. Continuing to Article 22, to see if the town school district, pursuant to 24 VSA Section 2804, will deposit into the reserve fund established in March 2011 the audited, unreserved, undesignated fund balance in the amount of $383,617 for the year ending June 30th, 2012, for the purpose of operating the schools. Mr. Truan.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I move that the legal voters of the town of Brattleboro School District will deposit into the Education Reserve Fund established in March 2011 the audited, unreserved, undesignated fund balance in the amount of $383,617 for the year ended June the 30th, 2012, for the purpose of operating the school.
Is there a second? I heard a second. Is there discussion?
Mr. Moderator, I would like to move to amend that article that I've just read.
Yes?
I would like to amend the motion. I move that the legal voters of the Town of Brattleboro School District will deposit into the Education Reserve Fund established in March 2011 the audited, unreserved, undesignated fund balance in the amount of $383,617 for the year ended June the 30th, 2011, for the purposes of operating the school.
Mr. Truett, I understand the only purpose of your amendment is to change June 30th, 2012 to June 30th, 2011. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. So the amendment is very simple. It may have been an oversight in the warning. Could that be it? And
I do believe it's just a printing error.
Printing error. Okay. So the first item for consideration would be the motion to amend, which was seconded. And that simply changes the date from June 30, 12 to June 30, 2011. Is there any discussion on that amendment? Hearing none, all those in favor of the printing error amendment changing the date to 2011, please rise. You may be seated. All those in opposition, please rise. And the amendment has carried. We now return to the principal motion as amended, which now reads June 30th, 2011. And is there any discussion as amended? Yes, sir.
I'm Siegel, District 3. I hope this doesn't start a big discussion. I have just a point of query of information. If this money is taken from the unreserved, undesignated fund balance, and we've already taken, this is really to you, Barbara. Barbara?
This is the school.
Okay, well, it's, the question has to do with the town, how it affects the town budget. But I'll put it out there, whoever wants to answer it can. If this money is taken from the unreserved, undesignated fund balance, and we've already committed pretty much that whole balance to remediation from Irene, which we're expecting to get money back from the state and the feds.
Point of order?
Yes.
Just
go ahead, Ms. Atkins.
Just to clarify this fund balance is in the school district portion. It's in the school district budget. It's not the town's.
It's a separate budget. Okay.
And so,
It's
this fund was established by this body last year.
Yes,
So.
answered my question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there further discussion with regard to the motion? Mr. Barber?
Thanks, Mr. Moderator. Orion Barber, District 1. At the risk of being trampled by the 16-horse hitch on a dead run for the stables here, am I right in thinking that the fund balance that we're talking about is shown on page 164? Thank you very much.
Is there further discussion?
Mr. Moderator?
Mr. DeGray.
Would Mr. Kane explain the differences between undesignated reserved balances for the school? I can tell you that ours can be saved, but there are different rules that apply for their undesignated money.
Mr. Kane is interrogated.
Okay. On page 164 of the town report, under the general fund balances, the lower left portion, there's a total fund balance of $1,053,042 at June 30th, 2011. $20,579 of that is held in reserve for prepaid expenses, for course reimbursement, and some other smaller expenses. The unrestricted committed balance is made up of $200,000 that was applied to reduce taxes in FY12, the current year. $148,846 is committed. That's for the educational fund reserve set aside that was approved at the March 2011 town meeting. And the unassigned balance, the $683,617, is made up of the $383,617 we're requesting be deposited into the education fund, as well as an additional $300,000 to defray and reduce the need to raise taxes for FY13, and that's reflected in the revenue budget in the town report on page 136.
Is there further discussion? The motion currently on the floor is, shall the legal voters of the town of Brattleboro deposit into the Education Reserve Fund established in March 2011 the audited, unreserved, undesignated fund balance in the amount of $383,617 for the year ending June 30th, 2011, for the purpose of operating the school. Are you ready for that motion? All those in favor, please stand. You may be seated. All those opposed, please stand. And Article 22 has been approved. Article 23, to see if the town school district will appropriate out of the audited, unreserved, undesignated fund balance the sum of $300,000 for the purpose of reducing the tax rate. I would call on Ms. Stahl-Tyler.
Thank you, sir. I move that the town of Brattleboro School District will appropriate out of the audited, unreserved, undesignated fund balance the sum of $300,000 for the purpose of reducing the tax rate.
Is there a second? Discussion. Mr. Sprick.
Rick Sprite, District 3. I just want to make sure in the midst of this that you guys aren't backing yourself into a corner in terms of not having any money that could be used in case something urgent comes up, a problem with the building or something unexpected.
We just designated $383,000 fund, so
Okay.
that's what.
But
thanks for the
I thought that was going into the operating budget instead. Okay, I misunderstood the accounting. Great, thanks.
Okay.
Is there further discussion? Hearing none, the issue is, before that will be considered, is shall the town of Brattleboro School District appropriate out of the audited, unreserved, undesignated fund balance the sum of $300,000 for the purpose of reducing the tax rate. All those in favor, please signify by rising. You may be seated. All those opposed, please rise. And the ayes have it, and you have approved Article 23. Article 24, to see how much money the town school district will raise and appropriate to defray its expenses and liabilities. Ms. Atkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I move that the legal voters of the town of Brattleboro School District vote to raise and appropriate the sum of $973,000 $826 as its share of the salaries and expenses of the Wyndham Southeast Supervisory Union, the sum of $259,022 as its share of bonded indebtedness, and $13,630,975 for current and other expenses for the support of the schools within the district, making in all the sum of $14,863,823. There's more. I just had to take a breath there. If adopted, the portion of this total sum to be raised by taxes only to be the only portion not received from revenues from other sources, and that interest at the rate of 1% per month be charged on overdue taxes from the due date of payment of town tax, school tax installment portion thereof, and the town and town school district taxes assessed on the grand list as of April 1, 2012, shall be due and payable in 4 equal installments, payable to the town treasurer until overdue, then the collector of taxes, and that such payment of installments shall be made on or before 5 o'clock on the afternoons of August 15th and November 15th, 2012, and February 15th and May 15th, 2013.
Is there a second? Discussion.
May I speak to the motion?
You may.
Thanks. I'll make it short. I know you see the light at the end of the tunnel. I first want to thank the members of the body who came to our meeting the other night. It was lengthy, but I hope educational. And I would also like to thank Jim Kane and Ron Staley and our wonderful principals, Andy Patchouli, Jen Hemmingson, John Reed, and Assistant Principal Jen O'Neill, and Deb Gass of EES, and the central office staff for their work with us on the budget, and also to acknowledge the members of the Finance Committee who came on many an early morning and worked very hard to understand our process and served this body very well. So we're well served by all these professionals. The budget you're acting on today is for educating students in the town of Brattleboro pre-kindergarten through grade 6. We're proposing an increase of $230,207, or 1.57%. The total includes all funds for operations, debt service, preschool, as well as allowances for anticipated wage settlements expected this year. The projected residential education tax rate of $1.5121 for 2013 is lower than the previous year's taxes. We were fortunate that several factors allowed this to happen. Our increases are related to to several things, but are all around our commitment to giving our students an education that is going to make them successful in their lives. Elementary school is about building the foundational skills children need to move on into careers and life. So strong reading and math skills, the ability to get along with people who are not like themselves, the ability to make healthy choices, exposure to the arts, exposure to the environment, and how to be a good citizen. Those are the mandates of public school. To continue the excellent work that we're doing, we're proposing some increases in some programs, $38,374 for our foreign language program, $46,290 for after-school enrichment programs, which includes academic support and additional arts and other programs, an increase of $92,503 for building maintenance, and an investment in the Internet Access Fiber Connect program of $25,200, some of which will be offset by other revenues. There has been a small increase in the health care payments for our staff of 3.5%, but overall our salaries and benefits show a net reduction due to savings from offering an early retirement incentive. Overall, I think we're offering a very responsible and budget that will allow us to maintain and expand our programs and continue to give our children what they need for their future. So I ask you to accept it.
Is there discussion? Mr. Elwell.
Corwin Elwell, District 3. Maybe Jim Kane or John O'Connor can help me. And I understand that our taxes are paid to the town for education, but then go to the state and then we get the money back. Nowhere in this report can I find a total of what is paid locally for education taxes.
On the schools end, after Act 68 came into being, that was the post-Act 60 equalization, the state blurred the lines between local tax and state education tax. So it is all considered state at this point. The state runs calculations based on the grand lists submitted. They've come up with the formula that's pretty confusing as far as the base education rate times the district spending, and the town takes the information and they project the total amount of tax needed. On our end, all we budget is the general state education payment, which is a combination of local tax collected by the town of Brattleboro, as well as payments from the state of Vermont 3 times a year. They come in September, December, and April 30th. So as far as the actual total dollars, I think it'd be best, I mean, John's better equipped to give that figure. I do have it on file at the office. I don't have it here now.
I don't have the exact figure, but I believe it's somewhere close to $10 million that we bill locally for the education tax.
Well, the reason I asked the question is because this whole process is very confusing to the taxpayer, and to all of the folks here. And I thought it might be educational for them to know how much we do pay in education taxes and how much we get back, on the other hand, from the state in order to fund education. That's the only reason for the question. And I thank you very much.
Mr. Kane.
John and I can get together and we can follow up with the town representatives to do a separate mailing to give you the recent history so you can see how it flows. It's not only confusing to some of this body, but there are quite a few others that are confused by the whole formula.
I realize that, I appreciate it, and I think it would be very educational for all of us to have that information.
Is there further discussion on the school budget? The motion is, shall the legal voters of the town of Brattleboro School District vote to raise and appropriate the sum of $973,826 as its share of the salaries and expenses of the Wyndham Southeast Supervisory Union, the sum of $259,022 as its share of bonded indebtedness, and $13,630,975 for current and other expenses for the support of the schools within the district, making in all the sum of $14,863,823. If adopted, the portion of the total sum to be raised by taxes to be only that portion not received from revenues from other sources, and that interest at a rate of 1% per month be charged on overdue taxes from the due date of payment of town taxes, school taxes, installment portions thereof, and the town and school district taxes assessed on the grand list as of April 1st, 2012, shall be due and payable in 4 equal installments payable to the town treasurer until overdue, then the collector of taxes, and that such payments of installments shall be made on or before 5 o'clock on the afternoon of August 15th and November 15th, 2012, and on February 15th and May 15th of 2013. Are you ready for the question? All those in favor, please signify by standing. You may be seated. All those opposed, please rise. And the budget has been duly approved and adopted. And that concludes the...
Mr. Moderator Pro Tem, I think you did an amazing job for filling
we're
in
not
at
done
the
yet.
last minute.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Harvey.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. George Harvey, District 3. I'd like to make a motion, and I'd like to speak to that motion if I could.
This is under Article...
Under Article 25.
Okay.
I move that the Select Board be directed to initiate a study of work on energy efficiencies and renewable power currently in use in Europe by referring the matter to appropriate committees and include it in the town plan. And the reason I'm making this motion is because in the last year I've been doing a lot of research on renewable energy in Europe, especially in Germany and Austria. I find that right now there are 100 communities in Germany that are well on the way to 100% reliance on renewable power. Some of them have already achieved it. The city of Freiburg in Breisgau is a good example. They're probably not a quarter of the way there, but in the process of doing what they have done, they have increased their prosperity by, among other things, adding 10,000 jobs in the renewable energy area in a city of less than 250,000 people. More similar to the situation of Brattleboro is an Austrian community called Güssing, which you can find in Wikipedia by going in and doing a search for the English word guessing. You'll find it that way. Güssing is a town of, it was 3,600 people 20 years ago. The politicians who were running for office at the time said, we've got to stop being poor. We're spending 6 million euros a year on power. They were in a situation where, in fact, they were very poor. 70% of the local workforce had to leave the area on a weekly commute to Vienna to get jobs. It was the poorest town in Austria. They put up 3 wind generators. They put in a biogas generator. And now, 20 years later, instead of spending 6 million euros a year on energy, they are creating 14 million euros a year worth of energy. In the course of that 20 years, they have had 50 businesses move into town, many of them to take advantage of low-cost renewable power, some of them very heavy power users. They have had an increase of 1,000 jobs in a community of 3,700 people, the head of a district of 25,000. There are many, many communities. There are areas in Spain. The district of Navarre in Spain has been working in this direction. And I think that we should be looking into the question of whether we could be financing some of the things that go on in this town by using renewable power, whether we can increase our employment locally by using renewable power, and we should be looking to these communities in Europe to do that. And that's the reason I make that motion.
Mr. Harvey, do you have a copy of that motion?
I have it written down right here.
Could you give me, I would need a copy, and then we do have a second. Thank you. Is there, thank you, okay. Is there further discussion with regard to Mr. Harvey's proposed resolution, Mr. Wilberding? Okay. I move that the Select Board be directed to initiate a study to work on energy efficiencies and renewable power currently in use in Europe by referring the matter to appropriate committee and to be included in the town plan.
John Wilmerding, District 3. In the Finance Committee during the past year, we took a look at similar information, in particular a German town in Bavaria called Wildpolsried, about the same size as the Austrian town which was mentioned, which created an entity to husband and bring forward renewable power initiatives, and as a result they now generate 3.5 times the electric power that they need in their town, and this is a substantial source of revenue for the town. I believe that this is a very urgent issue, and that our preliminary estimates in looking into it tell us that we could possibly, over a period of 10 years, perhaps bonding them, build 3 large solar arrays which would completely offset the town government's use of electric energy. We'd like to support the proposal. Thank you.
Is there further discussion? Mr. Davis.
Arthur Davis, District 3. As perhaps the youngest person in here, in the body, correct me if I'm wrong, but I would wholeheartedly support this motion. I would feel very supported for my future and the future of my peers and for future generations to come, knowing that our town was seriously considering making a move towards sustainability in this way. And I urge you all to really seriously consider supporting this.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. Further discussion on the resolution that is currently proposed. Okay, I'm going to give, yes, please.
Peter Yost, District 2. There's a lot of other efforts in town and in the region that I think would need to coordinate with the town on this. SEVCA is considering the formation of an energy cluster, which is also another concept imported from Europe. So, and I think this also bears relationship to the work that Paul Cameron's doing on the Climate Committee. So I just want to make sure that we coordinate a lot of efforts that are ongoing.
Thank you. Further discussion, Mr. Sprite?
Rick Sprite, District 3. This is an issue that's near and dear to me. I don't think what he's suggesting is reinventing the wheel. I think what he's suggesting is that we take this issue much more seriously and use the resources that we have here and take the examples from other places where this sort of thing has worked. I, just a couple weeks ago, was at the New England Sustainable Energy Association conference in Boston at the Seaport World Trade Center, and it was an eye-opening experience. There was a 16-member delegation, including government officials from Hamburg, Germany, among many others, and what is possible, even with the simplest, most readily available technology, when applied, is amazing. And there are things that we could do whenever we build or renovate a building, or in terms of our building codes, that we could do to make sure that anything that gets done from now on is done in a way that actually promotes a truly sustainable future for us. And I feel like a lot of us, including myself, spend a lot of time just trying to keep ahead of the day-to-day stuff. But if we don't do this, in the long run, we will not be able to keep ahead of the day-to-day stuff. So I feel some urgency, and And I also feel a lot of optimism based on my, especially on that visit to the conference and seeing what other people are doing both here and abroad.
Further discussion, Dr. Tortolani.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I'm Bob Tortolani, District 2. I think this is a very fine idea. My concern is we already know about all the commitments of our Select Board, and the motion directs the Select Board to have a committee, I think. I would like to hear from the Select Board in terms of the implementation of this and the financial aspects of it.
The Select Board is interrogated. Mr. DeGray?
Well, I think that the board would actually have to have a discussion as to which way we would want to go, how we could go, if there was going to be a cost factor involved. Obviously, this is under other business and advisory only. So I hear what everybody is saying. We do have an energy committee. We have Paul Cameron on staff. And I think that the board can have a discussion about this to see which way that we can go and possibly bring back a report next year, although the amendment, the motion doesn't say that. You are right, we have a full plate, and we really haven't got into what's going to happen to our town next year. So there's a lot of issues, and not to say that this isn't important, I believe that it is, but where you put your energy, so to speak, you only have so much in a tank, so we'll try to figure that out. But thank you for that question.
Very good. Welcome.
Ms. Baboulas.
Well, I was just going to say that what the motion is asking is for us to refer it to the appropriate committees. So probably what would happen is we'll ask the Energy Committee and the Planning Commission to look into these things.
I'll read the motion one more time. Shall the Select Board be directed to initiate a study of work on energy efficiency and renewable power currently in use in Europe by referring the matter to the appropriate committees for such study and to include it in the town plan? Is there further discussion? Yes.
Hi, I'm Ann Morrodell, District 2. I'm a founding member of the Energy Committee that was appointed by the Select Board. We work with Paul Cameron. And I would be able to support this with the exception of maybe to be included in the town plan, which I also worked on the energy chapter of the town plan. It's an incredibly strong working document, the town plan, and a lot of energy has gone into making it. I think if it said something like the Energy Committee and other committees in town would work on a study that would report back to this body, that would be something I could really support. The Town Energy Committee has a subcommittee that works on renewable energy, and you don't need to be a member of the Energy Committee to be on a subcommittee, and we're always looking for members to be on the subcommittee. And it is a really wonderful and a really active committee. Thank you.
Further discussion, Mr. Everett.
Mr. Moderator, I'd like to ask that Mr. Harvey accept a friendly amendment, and that is that we request the Select Board do something. We have no authority or power to instruct them and direct them to do anything.
Consistent. This is all advisory at this point. We are now discussing matters that are under Article 25, and only matters that are duly warned can have the force of enforcing somebody to do something. These are all advisory resolutions. So, I mean, I don't know if you have any problem with that, Mr. Harvey. It does say, I move that the Select Board be directed to initiate. I think it's kind of a, again, it's not, it can't be, but, okay, all right. It is advisory. So we'll, for now, we'll leave it as it is. Other comments? Yes.
Peter Fallion, District 3. I'm also a member of the Town Energy Committee and a member of the Efficiency Subcommittee. We are right now, Mr. Barrett this morning described working on street lights, examining every street light in town, making a determination along with obviously the Safety Committee and the Select Board. But we want to measure what whether or not we're overlighting or underlighting. And we expect that this will save a great deal of money by using LED lights. And I just want to encourage anyone in the audience in the body who wants to work on this energy subcommittee, that you get in touch with either Paul Cameron or Lester Humphreys, who is the chair of the Town Energy Committee. Thank you.
Further discussion?
David Scholes, Town School Board. I think one of the things in Mr. Harvey's presentation that no one's mentioned is the growth in jobs that were experienced in these communities and the growth in the investment in alternative energy generation brought businesses in. It created jobs and brought businesses in. And a lot of the problems that we're faced with, a lot of the things that are drawing our resources right now would be significantly moderated if we were to get more revenue from new industries, from a larger tax base. So I think it's important to keep that separate from limiting the costs of our streetlights. He's talking about an investment in energy production that would draw industry, draw investment into this community, improve our economic conditions, and maybe get our kids to stay around because there was something decent for them to do for a living. So please don't get it confused between conservation efforts and things that are going on, which are obviously very important. But investing in our future and investing in things that will grow this community is really important. I don't know how many different committees there are in town and around the region that are trying to find ways to grow the economy, trying to find ways to improve our economic growth. And they're treading water. No one has come up with a solution, and it's been a long time. So it really is time to take a serious look at a larger investment in producing energy.
The question is Mr. Harvey's resolution. Is there further discussion? I'm sorry, Mr. Chapman.
Thank you. I'm curious. I have received a communication last year from Mr. Wilmerding in this is very similar in this regard. I'm not familiar with any other interaction that those behind this initiative have had with the relevant town committees. I'd be very interested to know what groundwork or what homework that this group has had with the existing organization within the town on this matter, because I'm a little well, not confused, but just wondering why something like this comes to the town meeting rather than going through the town administration first.
Mr.
Kirk Dimes, District 2. I think this part of the charter answers...
Mr. Dimes, could you go to the mic so that we can get it? Yes, but you have the television as well, Mr. Dimes.
I like to look at the people I'm talking to. The charter reads why we should be answering this question here. The charter reads, Article 2, Section 3, the representative town meeting is a guiding body for the town and a source of ideas, proposals, and comments. I think it's perfectly right that Mr. Harvey's proposal be considered here.
Is there further discussion? Mr. Davis.
Andy Davis, District 3. I've been at, I think this is my 4th representative town meeting, and usually later than this, people are drifting out. And I think it's brilliant that we ended this meeting, the announced warnings, articles, in time to have a discussion about the future. And I totally agree with what Kurt just said, that we are a guiding body, and no different than our discussion earlier about traffic safety and the balance between vehicles and pedestrians. I think that Mr. Harvey's other business here is very germane in setting the tone for where we're going. So I think it's really great that we're sitting here, no one is running for the door, and we're talking about something that might be one of the most significant moves that we make in long-range planning since we switched over from water power to oil. So I congratulate you, Mr. Harvey, for taking the initiative on this. And the last thing I'll say is that it is advisory. There's nothing here that's forcing any of you to actually do anything. But it's letting you know, if we pass this, that we will know if you haven't done anything. And I'm actually thinking of getting involved in one of the committees. And I'll bet there's some other people too. So let's pass it.
Mr. Moderator? Mr. Moderator?
Where do I have, okay, Mr. Chapman.
Well, the question wasn't should we, but the question was what interaction has there been with town committees, the planning committee, the energy committee, the Brattleboro climate protection? That was my question. What interaction has the group behind this initiative had with the town? I just want to know.
Mr. Harvey, are you able to answer that question? Would you please take the microphone?
In answer to that, I would say that for the last 2 years, I have been working for the New England Coalition on Nuclear Pollution, and much of my work there has been to do research on alternatives so that we can move toward a good future. And in the course of doing that, I kept unearthing story after story after story, real, practical, real-world stories. I could go through long lists of these things about various communities that have worked in this direction in Europe. There has been a lot of work by a number of committees in Brattleboro that touch on this. And the Energy Committee is one, the Finance Committee is another, but there is no committee that is actually investigating the successes that have been made elsewhere. Now, this was something that I came in here, and quite frankly, the idea to produce this motion happened in this room this morning. And it is a response to something that I heard here. And so there is no group behind it. And I would like to suggest that maybe it would be possible for the various committees that are involved jointly to produce a subcommittee that was devoted to this particular question. But that's an issue that doesn't have to be dealt with today. This is something which what I would like to see is to have the Select Board say, we don't want to work with this. Let's hand it off to Spoonagavi. Let him deal with it. No money's involved. We don't have to think about this. We'll bring back a report and get all kinds of credit next year.
Dr. Schnick.
I'd like to call the question.
Second. Okay, there's been a motion to call the question and a second. That requires a 2/3 approval to cease debate. All those in favor of calling the question ceasing debate, kindly rise. You may be seated. All those who are opposed to ceasing debate, please rise. Be seated. And it is apparent that debate will cease. So we return to Mr. Harvey's resolution for consideration. Shall the Select Board be directed to initiate a study of work on energy efficiencies and renewable power currently in use in Europe by referring the matter to appropriate committees for such studies and to include it in the town plan? All those in favor of that resolution, please rise. You may be seated. All those opposed, please rise. And Mr. Harvey's resolution has been overwhelmingly approved. I have, let's see, a request here from Ms. Barboulis for an announcement.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I have here an invitation to all interested parties from Senator Vincent Illuzzi, the chair of the Senate Committee on Economic Development, Housing, and General Affairs. The Senate Economic Development, Housing, and General Affairs community-based hearing on March 30th, 9 a.m. at the Vermont Agricultural Business Education Center in Brattleboro. In the last legislative session, the General Assembly found it appropriate to provide funding to support the completion of the Southeastern Vermont Economic Development Strategy, SEVEDS, in support of workforce development and other activities that will assist Windham County in addressing the adverse economic consequences of the closure of Vermont Yankee, with particular emphasis on supporting Vermont Yankee employees and their families in securing new employment in Windham County. Members of the Senate Committee on Economic Development, Housing, and General Affairs will again visit the Windham region on Friday, March 30th, 2012. The committee will hold a community-based hearing to solicit testimony on progress towards these goals and how strategies for economic development might be furthered by testimony from interested members of the community. Your ideas and your input are important in this process. What plan might you have for economic development in the Windham region? You may contact me, and that's Vince Illuzzi, and we will work to schedule testimony from you or your organization. We want to be inclusive, but there is limited time. If you would like to submit written testimony, please email it to me, and it's got Vince Illuzzi's email at the state office and Senator Galbraith, and I can, this will be posted on iBrattleboro for people who do email, and then there's a mailing address for Roman Diniak, who's the Legislative Council who's the Legislative Council for their committee. And the location again of the hearing is the Vermont Agricultural Business Education Center at 8 University Way, Suite number 1, Brattleboro. The hearing will begin at 9 a.m. I'm going to be testifying. I think there's some people in this room that are going to be testifying, and I think it's a good opportunity. And just to follow, they will also be visiting in the afternoon the Tri-Park Cooperative Mobile Home Park, and then they're going to be going out to Wilmington to see the effects of Irene out there. So it's a good opportunity for us.
This is in the nature of an announcement, does not require further action by this board. Thank you, Ms. Barboulis. I am told, a report on the reappraisal committee of last year. Is that correct?
That is correct, Mr. Moderator. And if I may, just to remind people from last year, at the end of the meeting, an assessors committee was appointed by the moderator. That committee consisted of Charles Cummings, Dart Everett, Marshall Wheelock, Leo Burrill, Christopher Chapman, and Kathy Dowd. That committee met to come up with recommendations for this body as far as an amendment to the charter concerning the reappraisal of property and the creation of a Department of Assessment. That committee met and came up with recommendations, and in order for those changes to become a charter change, a resolution is required here to kick into process the amendment procedure, and I believe Ms. Dowd, and there was a copy of the resolution up here on the table, but Ms. Dowd has the resolution and I believe intends to read it.
The chair would recognize Ms. Dowd for that purpose, and could someone get me a copy of the resolution off the table?
Kathy Dowd, District 1. So what we're resolving to do and what we'd like to present as a committee is under Article 6, under Finances, Section 4, Office of Assessment. This is what we would like to say. Taxable property within the town may be reappraised from time to time as may be deemed expedient by the representative town meeting pursuant to a duly warned article. Under A, there shall be an Office of Assessment headed by a professionally qualified assessor or equivalent hereafter known as the town assessor, who shall be appointed by the town manager. Except for the duties set forth in Article 8, Section 4D of this charter, the town assessor shall have the authority and shall exercise all powers and shall be responsible to fulfill all duties assigned to the listers in the Vermont statutes and case law, including, but not limited to, appraisal of all real and business property for the purposes of establishing the grand list, as set forth in Title 32, Section 3431. Appraisals shall be reviewed periodically and kept up to date. Under C, neither the town assessor nor any employee of the Department of Assessment staff nor any independent contractor directly or indirectly providing services for the tax assessing function of the town may simultaneously serve as a lister for this town. And under D, the Board of Listers, elected at large under the authority of Article 2, Section 1E of this bylaw, having no appraisal power, shall function as a Board of Appeals with the authority to hear and adjudicate all appeals by citizens disputing Office of Assessment appraisals, and perform other advisory and educational functions for the Office of Assessment. And as a committee member, I think this is a pretty concise resolution after the long meetings. Thank you.
Ms. Dowd, before you run, or maybe somebody else can help me, I have a copy of the resolution and the 4 points. What exactly are you looking for this body to do today? To adopt, to approve the report? Mr. Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Yes, the resolution, what the committee was asking is for this body to adopt the resolution, which, if adopted, would then kick into gear the amendment process, which the next step would be a publicly warned meeting to discuss this in further detail, just like the Charter Committee did prior to its recommendations a year ago. So there would be a public meeting so anybody can become informed about this.
So this kicks the process off,
That's
is that
correct.
right?
And then after that public meeting, and the charter says not less than 60 days after that meeting, there would be a special representative town meeting. And just so everyone knows, we would try to coordinate that with another, what we expect to be upcoming special town meeting with regard to the police fire. So we would try to coordinate it such that there would be only one special town meeting versus a separate one for this.
In that case, do I have a second to Ms. Dowd's resolution? Okay. Is there further discussion relating to the resolution? And as I understand it, everyone got a copy of their white sheet here, so we've presumably had a chance to look at it to some degree. If not, all those in favor of adopting the resolution as read by Ms. Dowd, kindly rise. Thank you. You may be seated. All those opposed, please rise. And you have adopted and approved the resolution of the committee charged with review of the reappraisal process. Is there other matters to be, other announcements or other matters to be taken up? I'll take Ms. Davison. Oh, I'm sorry. I did tell Mr. Phillips he was next. Sorry, Mrs. Davison.
Thank you. I'll try to be brief. Steve Phillips, District 3. There's a handout, a memo to the Select Board from the town manager about the charter changes. We talked about it briefly before. I think that what the Vermont House Committee is proposing to do by adding the sentences, however well-intended, will create ambiguity and will not reflect really the wishes of the representative town meeting. And if you refer to that handout, there are two underlined sentences. And so my resolution is that the representative town meeting requests that the select board, in consultation with the town attorney, promptly notify the Vermont Senate or applicable committee thereof to delete the underlined sentences proposed to be added to the Brattleboro Town Charter by the suggestion of the Vermont House Government Operations Committee. And I've attached the memo to the back of this, which I'll hand to you, which has the underlined sentences. And they are, if I should read them into the record.
I think it would be wise to do so, Mr. Phillips.
So to delete, the town clerk and town treasurer shall be non-voting ex officio members if appointed by the town manager. That's the first sentence that was added by the Vermont House, not by request of the representative body. The second is a clause at the end of Article 3, Section 2. Unless it is deemed illegal or unconstitutional by the body in consultation with the town attorney. And that has to do with petitions. So this was not the language we presented to the legislature, and I think keeping it in will create a problem. And if the Senate can fix it, I think we ought to direct our select board to try to get that done so that there won't be this continuing ambiguity.
Is there a second to the resolution being proposed by Mr. Phillips? Second. Is there discussion? Mr. Chapman.
My pretty clear understanding, Mr. Moderator, is that the House Government Operations Committee has put that language in after deliberation on what was put in front of it, and having been scratching its head over other language there, and that it's trying to straighten that out with the language that it put in. And my understanding is that the legislature has the power to make these changes. That's been affirmed by a recent Supreme Court decision, Vermont Supreme Court decision. So I'm not sure that it's the most constructive thing to do is to try to undo the work of the House Government Operations Committee after it has deliberated on a number of items. I think that a review of their rationale would be in order first.
Further comments or discussions on the proposed resolution? Mr. Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. And I don't want to get into a huge debate on the charter at this point, but just because the House committee took action on this, it now moves to the Senate committee. And the reason I believe Mr. Phillips is asking that the Select Board contact the Senate committee is that if the Select Board, without the resolution of the town representatives here, the members, go and ask for a change, it can be interpreted that the Select Board is asking for a change different from what this body approved as its charter amendments last year. The first one, dealing with the town clerk and town treasurer not being voting members if appointed by town manager, is actually moot because the recommendations for the town treasurer and town clerk to be department heads was defeated at last year's special representative town meeting. Secondly, the other language dealing with the unless it is deemed illegal or unconstitutional by the body in consultation with the town attorney. There was great discussion at our February meetings a year ago regarding whether that language should be the term frivolous, the term germane, the term relevant, and those all got voted down by this body. So the attempt here by the House Legislative Council is to somehow limit what the citizens can petition to go before a vote. In my view, saying whether it's illegal or not is actually a harder decision than determining what is germane or relevant, because it may be legal for a petition to say, shall we all wear purple on Tuesday? There's nothing illegal about that. That may not be germane to town business. And we had that debate. So the point in raising this is for us to at least say to the Senate committee, we discussed this last year, and then see what they do. The House and the Senate do have the power to make changes to our recommendations, there's no doubt about it. But as far as what this body wants them to look at, the request here is to have our voice heard in Montpelier. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fisher. Mr. Gartenstein.
I agree with Mr. Phillips and with Mr. Fisher. I think that town meeting made the decision about charter changes, and that we should communicate back to the Senate that we agree with what the town meeting representatives voted on, rather than taking suggestions from other sources.
Is there further discussion on the motion? Mr. Sprite.
Rick Sprite, District 3. Yeah, I felt like our review of the charter between the committee and the many hours that we spent as a body over it was thorough and thoughtful, and impressed the heck out of me how much attention to detail was spent on it. It made me proud to be a town meeting rep and a member of this community. So I don't see a need to change it, so I would encourage you to advise the Senate that we'd like it stick with what we came up with.
Further discussion, Mr. Barber.
Thanks, Mr. Moderator. Orion Barber, District 1. As a former member of the Charter Revision Commission that proposed changes to this body and which the body deliberated on, I agree that this is inappropriate. The Charter itself lays out the path for charter amendments, and a memo like this is not part of that path. The process we followed is and was the path. Now, what the legislature decides to do is up to the legislature, but we shouldn't muddy the water by sticking in something purporting to be from this town at this point.
Further discussion. I would ask Mr. Phillips, since he's right next to the microphone, to please read the resolution one more time for you, and then to hand it back to me.
I think I've written it more clearly this time. Resolved that the representative town meeting request that the Select Board, in consultation with the town attorney, promptly notify the Vermont Senate or appropriate committee thereof to delete the attached underlined portions of the proposed town charter suggested to be added by the Vermont House Government Operations Committee in order to reduce ambiguity and to more clearly reflect the wishes of the representative town meeting.
Are you ready for that question? If so, All those in favor of Mr. Phillips's resolution, kindly rise. You may be seated. All those opposed, please rise. The ayes have it. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. And you have approved Mr. Phillips' resolution, which I would appreciate, Mr. Phillips, if you could bring up and give to the clerk. I had Mrs. Davison and then Mr. Dimes.
Judy Davidson, District 3. My question is really a question of information. The whole question of a 1% sales tax was raised as a question for the town to consider, the town reps to consider sometime in the future. From the Finance Committee recommended that. So I'm wondering when in the future will the town reps get a chance to have this kind of a conversation about would a 1% sales tax be helpful in terms of building in a capital budget? Thank you.
Mr. DeGray.
Thank you for that question, and thank you, Mr. Moderator. My feeling was and is that we are looking like we're going to have a special meeting. I'm not sure we're talking about May, but that might be premature. At that time, if I can conjure up 3 votes, 2 other votes to support a 1% sales tax, to at least have that discussion in conjunction with the police fire as part of what we would do with that revenue to help offset the cost of that. So we can bring that to you at that special town meeting. We can debate it, and then it can be voted up or down. We have discussed it here, but the totality of that is that we kind of give it the brush off. And the reality is, you've heard today that, as you've heard the last few years, revenue sources are limited, and having that discussion to help pay for such a huge capital project that needs to get done, truly needs to get done, and how we pay for it, I think the 1% sales tax would be a good use of that money, and that's what we would have that discussion at that meeting. It would be an article question.
Thank you. Mr. Dimes.
Kurt Dimes, District 2. In the spirit of Mr. Harvey's resolution, I would like the body to consider this resolution. Whereas the voters of Brattleboro have resolved that Vermont Yankee shall be closed, whereas many supporters of Vermont Yankee have been concerned for an adequate supply of electric power, whereas people in Brattleboro and across the nation are urgently concerned to develop alternatives to nuclear power, and whereas the Central Vermont Public Service Corporation, CVPS, maintains a program called Cow Power for developing investments in renewable energy that can replace nuclear power, we, the representatives of the town of Brattleboro, resolve by this writing, to be known as the Nuclear Divestment Resolution, that electric power purchased by the town shall be generated from renewable sources like cow power, and we recommend further that the people of Brattleboro should also choose this for their homes, and that other people choose it for their communities.
Is there a second to Mr. Dimes's motion? Mr. Wilberding. Do you want to be heard on the motion?
Please.
Go ahead.
The people of Jericho, Vermont adopted such a program some years ago, 5 or 6 years ago. I talked with their town secretary, and it's going fine. To do it here in Brattleboro would incur a cost of roughly $12 per person per year. And I have checked this out with people around downtown. I talked to 60 people twice, not the same people, and the support for it is very strong. Roughly 2 to 1 people support it despite the cost. The issue of Vermont Yankee looms in the background here. Everybody wants to, well, a great majority of people in Brattleboro want to close it, but what will it cost to close it? What will it cost to develop alternative energies? Here's an example. It will cost $12 per year per person. I strongly hope that we can resolve this as a policy directive to the Select Board to be further developed and made compulsory for the town. And thank you for your time.
Is there further discussion with regard to the resolution proposed by Mr. Dimes? Mr. Wilberding.
John Wilmerding, District 3. Last year, Mr. Dimes proposed this or an almost identical resolution on the floor of this meeting, and I proposed that it be tabled. And we have been looking at the resolution and what its potential impacts would be in the context of the Town Finance Committee. We had an official from CBPS come and give us a presentation on the issue of whether or not the town should buy into the Cow Power program and what that would cost the town. We found, and other members of the committee can correct me if I'm wrong, that if we were to buy in 100% to Cow Power, the premium that we would pay in order to fund the development of new methane digester facilities by CVPS through the program would amount to about $100,000 a year for the additions that we would pay to the town electric bill. However, CVPS has lesser amounts. You can buy in, I believe it is at 25% and at 50%. I think that as a good faith effort to begin our transition away from polluting electric sources, I would favor a 25% buy-in to the Cow Power program, but I'm not speaking for the committee. This is my own personal opinion.
Is there further discussion with regard to the resolution presented by Mr. Dimes? Hearing none, all those in favor of approving the resolution as read by Mr. Dimes, and I'll review it, whereas the voters of Brattleboro have resolved that Vermont Yankee shall be closed, and whereas many supporters of Vermont Yankee have been concerned for an adequate supply of electric power, and whereas people in Brattleboro and across the nation are urgently concerned to develop alternatives to nuclear power, and whereas Central Vermont Public Service Corporation maintains a program called Cow Power for developing investments in renewable energy that can replace nuclear power, we, representatives of the town of Brattleboro, resolve by this writing to be known as the Nuclear Divestment Resolution, that electric power purchased by the town shall be generated from renewable sources like Cow Power, and we recommend further that the people of Brattleboro also should choose this for their homes and that other people choose it for their communities. All those in favor of the resolution, please rise. You may be seated. All those opposed to the resolution, please rise. The nays appear to have it, the nays do have it, and the resolution is defeated. Ms. Stewart? I know, we are on Article 20, we're on any business including announcements. Mr.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. I just wanted to request that people fill out the survey from Senator Doyle, who is an icon of the Vermont Senate and a professor at Johnson State College. It just gives both the House of Representatives and the Senate a general informal feeling of how people's sentiments on a broad variety of issues. Thank you very much. It's the green paper on your, and also there is a box as you exit. If you could put them in the box, that would be much appreciated. Thank you.
To that, yes, okay.
If you could bring back to the Senator, and I certainly wrote this on my survey, the survey is extraordinarily problematic because it does not in any way articulate whether our personal information will be coded to the answers that we're going to be given on the survey. It in no way indicates what's going to be done with the data, and quite frankly doesn't allow for any nuance of opinions on some really nuanced issues. It's from a as a researcher, from a human subject's perspective, it is an extraordinarily problematic survey, and I would ask that that be brought back. Oh, I did.
You didn't sign it.
Oh, I signed it.
Mr. Wilberding.
John Wilmerding, District 3. I want to apologize for taking a little bit more of the meeting's time, but I want to present a question which I believe is an urgent matter of public safety. I would like to present a little bit of discussion to this, but I'll start by putting a motion on the floor that the Town Select Board and other officials expedite, in whatever ways possible, the installation of a sidewalk and other public safety amenities in the section of Vermont Route 5, Putney Road, between the West River Bridge and the nearest sidewalk further north.
Is there a second? Mr. Wilberding, I didn't get it all, so I'm going to let you to speak on the motion, but then if you could give me a copy.
I have it here, yes.
Okay, great. You may speak on the motion.
I spoke with Steve Barrett about this earlier today, and he informed me that that is a section of state highway. I am asking for town action, however, to expedite in whatever ways possible the installation of a sidewalk there. I'm not requesting that the town install the sidewalk, but what I understand needs to happen is that we need to contact the state and have them move on it or work out some kind of an accommodation where more than one party move on it. But I regard this as an urgent matter of public safety. I've been concerned about this area of Route 5 for years. There's no sidewalk. There's only a very, very narrow shoulder where people can walk. I was one of more than 1,000 pedestrians to walk up that road on Thursday. And in order for us to pass, the traffic had to be slowed to about 10 miles per hour. The Corrections Department is located near that place, and people who are probationers and parolees who don't have resources, probably not for a car or a bicycle, have to walk through there on a regular basis. Public agencies place people in motels north of town, and those people frequently walk to town along that stretch of highway. And the town plan indicates that we should develop sidewalk along there. But as part of the larger town plan, it doesn't have sufficient urgency for me. The plan also indicates that we should develop more housing in the north part of Brattleboro. I believe that it's very, very urgent in public safety terms that we have a sidewalk built in that section of highway.
Is there further discussion with regard to Mr. Wilberding's resolution? Yes.
Dan Heiner, District 3. I believe that's all owned by the state.
Ms. Kane?
Mary Kane, District 2. We had a VTrans economic impact interactive TV session here at BUHS this past week, where we discussed similar things of that nature. We were waiting on Molly Burke to give us a report back, as they had stated she would, about the exact nature of what kind of funding we might have available to our community so that we could improve this infrastructure. So if Molly could address that, I would really appreciate it.
Molly Burke, District 2. I'm not sure what report I'm supposed to give unless it was a report on what's coming out of the just passed, House-passed transportation bill. And I'd be happy to, once the bill is passed the Senate, I'd be happy to provide town meeting members with some information about what the bill includes. However, there are no specific, aside from, say, enhancement grants the town can apply for sidewalks and other things that get on a project list. There's my understanding of this VTrans interactive television was that they were supposed to gather information that they would then develop into their next year's budget plan. So I will maybe talk with Ms. Kane afterwards and try to get a little more specific information and try to get information out to the town. I think one of the real big issues that's happening right now is the federal transportation bill that's being discussed in Washington. And I think probably many people have noted that the Senate did pass a version that pretty much level funds transportation funding for Vermont, which is good news, but the House, all bets are off as to what the House is going to do. I mean, basically the House's position that they want to give the power to the states to do all their transportation. So it's a little unclear. They want to put enhancement grants together with Safe Routes to Schools grants and have them compete with each other. The Safe Routes to Schools grants and the enhancement grants are specific things that can be used for sidewalks. So it's the funding picture is a little bit unclear right now, but I will try to get more information. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Burke.
Mr. Moderator?
Yes, Mr. DeGray.
Thank you. 6 years ago, the board heard from VTrans and voted to support an initiative for the Route 5 corridor that would include 3 roundabouts. And that is on the docket for 2018. And one of the things that everybody will recall is the Citizens Bridge, and wondering why there wasn't public comment, or the Main Street project. VTrans does their projects and they're 10 years out. And so in 2006, I heard about a project that hopefully I'm around for to see, that is going to start in 2018. That is the proposed date. And so trying to expedite and put in sidewalks, I don't think that we're going to be able to motivate VTrans to move us up on the docket, as they're all scheduled projects. When you talk about sidewalks, we just did a $56 million project here at the high school, yet we don't have a sidewalk over on the street next door to us. We don't have sidewalks all the way up on Route 9, and we have a lot of pedestrian traffic. We have issues with sidewalks in our town when it comes to pedestrian safety in the winter. Luckily this year, it was so mild and a lack there of snow, the board didn't really hear from people about sidewalks getting plowed. At the end of the day, it all comes down to money and level of service. If you want to have sidewalks everywhere, and if you want the town to plow them, it costs money. And if you want to have an ordinance, which we had talked about 3 years ago, of making everyone shovel their own sidewalk in front of their house, I certainly heard from quite a few elderly people as to say, I can't do that and I don't have the money to pay for someone, so I'm going to get a fine. So it's that balancing act. Certainly we're aware of that. I appreciate what you're saying, John. That project with sidewalks is proposed for 2018, and although it seems like a long way away, it's right around the corner. So that's the report on that project.
Mr. Wobending, did you want to further comment?
To the person who said, I believe that is owned by the state, I want to say that my own introductory remarks included the fact that it is owned by the state, and that I had conferred with Steve Barrett about that fact. But I do think that aside from the larger project with the 3 roundabouts, This one small area of highway presents an urgent matter of public safety where pedestrians are at risk.
Is there further discussion on Mr. Wilberding's resolution? I will read it. That the Town Select Board and other officers expedite in whatever ways possible the installation of a sidewalk and other public safety amenities in the section of Vermont Route 5 Putney Road between the West River Bridge and the nearest sidewalk further north. Is there further discussion? If not, all those in favor of the resolution, please rise. You may be seated. And all those opposed to the resolution, please rise. It appears that the ayes have it. And there has been a request for a division. So what I'm going to do now is ask everyone in favor of Mr. Dimes' resolution to please stand and remain standing. Wilberding, sorry, I'm sorry. Mr. Wilberding's resolution. To stand and remain standing while the clerks count the actual people who are voting yes. These are people in favor of the resolution. You may be seated. All those opposed, please stand and remain standing. Listen to the results of your vote. Those in favor, 42. Those opposed, 31. And Mr. Wilberding's resolution has been approved.
Is there a quorum?
Yes, because we only need actually 73 for a quorum, I think. 73 for a quorum, and there was 73 votes cast. I'm sorry, Mr. I got a feeling we're losing a quorum, however, as we speak. Mr. Schneck.
Yes.
Dr. Schneck.
I do not need a quorum for this item, but I know some of them have left, but I would ask that those for whom this is their first representative town meeting, please stand and be recognized by their peers. And I would also like to thank Marshall Wheelock for giving a presentation earlier at 8:10 this morning, which seems days ago, on the history of town meeting. And Annette and I will certainly talk about augmenting that little session we had over there, because it was really nice feedback on Robert's rules and history of town meeting for anyone and everyone for next year. So thank you.
Dr. Abel?
Thank you for recognizing me. Peter Abel, District 1. Prior to moving for adjournment, I had a suggestion that perhaps if we have a problem in putting sidewalks in this area north of the bridge, I don't know who's responsible for determining the speed limits, but if the speed limit were reduced from 40 miles an hour to 25,
until such time as the sidewalks were installed, it might make it safer. I move we adjourn.
It has been moved and seconded that we adjourn. That is not a debatable issue. So I will present that question to you. All those in favor of adjourning, please rise. You may be seated. All those in favor of not adjourning, please rise. And you have adjourned the meeting for 2012.